There have been numerous innovations that have improved people's lives and progressed civilization. But there have also been others that were heralded as tremendous breakthroughs but later revealed to have a nasty side. Gasoline was of poor quality in the early 20th century, resulting in engine knocking, which reduced power and fuel efficiency and caused breakdowns. So, in 1916, Charles Kettering, the inventor of the electric starter, tasked one of his employees, 27-year-old Thomas Midgley, with discovering a petrol additive that would make car engines run more smoothly. Midgley began experimenting with hundreds of different substances before discovering ethanol. In February 1920, Midgley filed a patent application for an anti-knock fuel made of alcohol and gasoline. Midgley and Kettering would enthusiastically promote ethanol as the future fuel. But ethanol production cannot be patented and thus cannot generate a significant profit. Farmers could easily produce ethanol from grain, and with prohibition now in effect in the United States, an increasing number of people were distilling their own alcohol at home. Because ethanol was also a fuel, it was reviled by oil companies, with whom the fledgling automakers were developing a mutually beneficial relationship that they did not want to jeopardize. Midgley and Kettering were now employed by General Motors, which was led at the time by Alfred P. Sloan, who scrapped the plan to market ethanol-blended gasoline in 1921. To compete with Ford's popular Model T, Sloan built flashier cars with more powerful engines. But engine knock remained an issue, so Midgley was sent back to the laboratory and told to develop an efficient and low-cost gasoline additive that could generate revenue for General Motors. In December 1921, Midgley discovered the solution in just a few months: tetraethyllead, TEL, which was discovered in 1853 by German chemist Carl Jacob Loewy, had no commercial applications until Midgley discovered that adding it to gasoline eliminated engine knocking, which occurs when a cool flame ignites the fuel too early. TEL disrupts that reaction, allowing combustion to take place at the proper time, increasing engine compression and thus speed and fuel economy. Best of all, TEL was inexpensive to produce from the standpoint of General Motors, and its application for this purpose could be patented, potentially yielding enormous profits. The first leaded gasoline was sold in February 1923 in Dayton under the brand name Ethyl, a name that clearly evoked the discarded clean-burning ethyl alcohol, and the word lead was never used in any advertising or promotional material to avoid alarming the public, as the negative health effects of lead were well known. Midgley was named vice president of the Ethyl Corporation, a joint venture between General Motors and Standard Oil that commissioned the chemical behemoth DuPont to create an additive known as ethyl fluid. When dozens of workers at the newly opened New Jersey manufacturing plant began hallucinating, going insane, and dying, several states quickly banned TEL. Midgley, who had spent much of 1923 in Miami recovering from lead poisoning, took part in a famous press conference on October 30, 1924, to demonstrate TEL's apparent safety. He rubbed TEL on his hands and inhaled its fumes for 60 seconds in front of reporters, declaring that he would suffer no harm from doing so every day and blaming the injured workers for failing to follow safety procedures. Midgley, on the other hand, must have been aware that TEL was poisonous. In 1922, the chairman of DuPont described TEL as a colorless liquid of sweetish odor, very poisonous if absorbed through the skin, resulting in lead poisoning almost immediately. Midgley, on the other hand, continued to ignore TEL's dangers, focusing instead on its apparent economic benefits. As far as science knows at the present time, tetraethyllead is the only material available that can produce these results, which are critical to the continued economic use of all automotive equipment by the general public, he told a meeting of scientists in 1925. He also avoided discussing his prior support for ethanol as an effective, clean-burning anti-knock additive. The U.S. Surgeon General was eventually persuaded, under intense pressure from the large corporations involved, that the health effects of leaded gasoline would be minor, especially when weighed against the much-touted economic benefits. Within a few years, regulatory barriers erected by some states and health authorities were swept away, and by 1936, ethyl fluid was added to 90% of gasoline sold in the United States. In the decades that followed, leaded gasoline would become the norm all over the world. For example, in 2000, 4 million cars in Mexico City were pumping some 32 tons of lead into the air every day. The public health consequences of leaded gasoline are difficult to overstate. Lead has no physiological function in the human body and is toxic to numerous organ systems, including the kidneys and nervous system. It is especially harmful to children, especially their developing brains, causing intelligence loss and an increased likelihood of aggressive and impulsive behavior, permanent and untreatable effects. Some researchers have linked childhood lead exposure to societal levels of violent crime. Returning to the 1920s and Thomas Midgley, His next major invention was intended to solve a problem with General Motors refrigerators, which were becoming a popular household appliance in the Roaring '20s. These devices occasionally leaked refrigerant gases, either sulfur dioxide or methyl formate. Midgley was a member of the scientific team that discovered dichlorofluorocarbons, the first of the chlorofluorocarbons. In 1928, Freon 12 was the brand name for the refrigerant. Midgley, ever the showman, inhaled the gas and blew out a candle to demonstrate its effectiveness to the American Chemical Society. In the decades that followed, chlorofluorocarbons became ubiquitous around the world as refrigerants, propellants in aerosol cans and solvents. What Midgley could not have known at the time was that these gases would eventually tear a huge hole in the Earth's ozone layer, which protects us from the sun's carcinogenic ultraviolet radiation. Although the hole caused by CFCs seems to have stabilized, the current situation is still worrying and the damage will take decades to repair itself. While Midgley can be excused for the CFC disaster, the toxic effects of tetraethyllead were obvious from the start. Thomas Midgley was honored for these two discoveries, particularly ethyl gasoline, as well as his 170 other patents. After contracting polio in 1940, Midgley became paralyzed and bedridden. As an accomplished inventor, he devised a system of ropes and pulleys that allowed others to lift and move his body. On November 2, 1944, he became entangled in the ropes and died of strangulation at the age of 55. After wreaking global havoc with his first two great discoveries, his final invention harmed only him.